Qamar Cheema and viewers. Today I have with me Mr. Akhil Barry. He's the director of the South Asia Initiatives at the Asia Strategy Policy Institute, Washington. So I really wanted that should be some perspectives from Washington, that what is how the Washington is looking the South Asian policy and what's going on in Europe and how that is linked with the South Asia. So thank you very much, Mr. Akhil Barry, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Okay, Akhil, there's a quick question, and that's about this recent virtual Quad meeting in which we have seen, or the image which was developed, that the Quad leaders agree that this aggression is not good, but they believe that India is taking a different line. So how do you see that should the Western world, should the Americans and the others not drag Ukraine into the Quad, or do you believe that the America will take it and the all developing situation?
So I think there is an immense amount of pressure on India to take a position on Ukraine. As you've seen, it's abstained at the UN Security Council on a number of issues, and also at the UN Human Rights Council. In the Quad in particular, India sees what's happening in the Indo-Pacific as separate from what's happening in Ukraine. It sees them as two completely different issues, and it would actually prefer if the West focused on what it perceives to be the real threat, which is China. Now, of course, there is broader Western alignment on the issue of Ukraine. I mean, Australia, Japan, and the US. Japan, for example, in 2014, it did not sanction Russia for its invasion of Crimea, but has come out in strong support of the Western campaign. Australia has as well. So it is kind of an awkward dynamic for India to be the one left out, but India sees these as two very distinct and separate issues, though there is a lot of pressure from the US and other countries for India to take a stand against this Russian invasion.
So how do you think that the perspectives which are coming from India, they are like, yes, we should not take the line of the West. So do you think that India can resist all that pressure in case looking at how its position have changed over the period of time?
So India's position has actually changed. I mean, if you take a look, 20 years ago, India would not publicly criticize Russia. But the dynamics have changed. So if you take a look at the UN Security Council resolutions, India has actually become much more vocal with its public criticism of Russia. It won't mention Russia by name. And I would also point out that in the Quad statements, India also pushes for China not to be mentioned by name because it doesn't believe that that is a productive way to engage with both countries. But that said, I mean, India has been a little more vocal with its criticism. I think you saw this most recently when President Putin said that Ukrainian soldiers were holding Indian students hostages, and India came out, a statement from the Ministry of External Affairs came out and said, no, that is not the case at all. We have seen no evidence to that. So there is a discomfort within New Delhi about Russia's actions, but given the long historical relationship there and India's reliance on Russian military equipment, India doesn't see any choice right now but to abstain because it has moved closer to the West in the last 20 years. Russia is not the friend it once was, but because Russia is making inroads into India's neighborhood, specifically Pakistan and China, India feels that it needs to stay engaged. And if it were to openly criticize Russia, it would lose that area of engagement.
Well, okay, we all have realized that India's global status have elevated because of its position, internal strength, global engagement. So these kind of challenges will keep coming. So how do you believe that India will keep, will keep itself at arm's length from these challenges, but will keep benefiting from the West?
It's going to be extremely difficult. I mean, India has a stated foreign policy objective of strategic autonomy, but I think as you've seen with the Ukraine crisis, strategic autonomy, sometimes the decision is forced for you. It's going to be extremely hard to keep straddling the fence. But that said, I think India sees the situation as the Russia issue is a distraction. The real focus should be on China because it believes that there is a coming Cold War and it's between the US and China. And in that situation, India has picked a side. It's clearly picked the US. It has deepened ties with the US over the last 20 years since the nuclear deal was signed. India-US ties have become extraordinarily strong. It's a bipartisan relationship. So I would argue in that sense, India has made a decision. But if in the conflict between the US and Russia, India will continue to try to straddle the fence for as long as it can.
Well, Akhil, what we have realized over the period of time that India, the Prime Minister Modi, since he's been in office, he has given a lot of confidence to the Indians. Globally, they are accepted that this is an emerging country, but at the same time, we have seen that there is an illiberal democratic tendencies in India. So, how come the West will keep looking all that, or do you think the West does not have that leverage to monitor, gauge the illiberal democratic tendencies? In other countries at this moment when they cannot even criticize China fully, or even if they criticize or they punish, there is nothing which is going to come out. So how illiberal policies in India, and particularly in Prime Minister Modi's era, will keep Western eyes away from India?
So I would say that, I mean, the Biden administration has elevated human rights as a part of its foreign policy platform. But as National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said at the Council on Foreign Relations a few months ago, human rights is just one plank of the overall diplomatic strategy. The US is concerned about what's going on. I would point you to Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asia, Donald Lu's testimony on Wednesday in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where he did bring up concerns about the fact that that there have not been elections in Kashmir yet. He did bring up the fact that there is an increased targeting of minorities within India. So it is concern. There are U.S. concerns, and they do raise it with the Indians in private. But it does point to the U.S.'s overall strategy. I mean, look at the partners that the U.S. has had in other situations. It does not have the best record of alienating countries that do not have a strong record on human rights. But that's it. I mean, human rights is a part of the foreign policy plank, but it's not the be-all, end-all of the U.S. foreign policy establishment.
Okay, Akhil, let's moving forward towards Pakistan. How do you see that the Washington administration is looking towards Pakistan? It seems that the relations have been downgraded between both the countries, and Pakistan is not that much relevant. So, how do you think that? What kind of engagements do you believe the Washington will have with Islamabad in coming years?
It's difficult to say because you're absolutely spot on. The Biden administration has not prioritized relations with Pakistan at all. I mean, I would also point to the fact that that President Biden still has not called Prime Minister Imran Khan. Yet there was pressure on Prime Minister Khan not to take that trip to Moscow. But I think, especially within Washington, as Pakistan gets closer to China and Russia, it's not going to find as many friends here in Washington. And there is also the Afghanistan issue. I mean, there is a strong belief in this city that Pakistan helped lead to that some in the Pakistani establishment helped with the Taliban's victory and its subsequent rapid takeover of Afghanistan. So perhaps the Biden administration will find a common cause to work with Pakistan in the future, but right now it doesn't seem like Pakistan is a high priority for this administration, especially because Pakistan has gotten closer to China. It has gotten closer to Russia, both which are U.S. adversaries, even though Pakistan does occupy a strong strategic space and has indicated that it does want better relations with the U.S.
Okay. So, okay, another quick question, and that is that since we have understood that India is getting more relevant globally, so the pressure, or what we call the influence of the great powers on India has reduced a lot. We have seen that back in when the Trump administration, when he asked for mediation between India and Pakistan on Kashmir. So we have believed neither the British nor the Americans nor the other any country can influence India for bringing on for the talk between India and Pakistan. With such kind of a situation, how do you see the peace of South Asia or the peace between India and Pakistan? Because we have realized over the period of time that things are getting deteriorated. Yes, over the period of time, there have been some good agreements, like on the line of 2003 ceasefire agreement, but the peace is at stake. So how do you see that there is no third party which can bring India and Pakistan on the table, and there is no appetite between India and Pakistan to talk? So how do you look? You see that in Washington?
Well, so I would agree with you on the fact that because Washington has chosen New Delhi over Islamabad, it does not have the same sway in Islamabad as it once did. And the UK is also gravitating more towards India. due in part to the UK wanting to sell a post-Brexit UK economy. I mean, so I would point to the fact that the UK and India are embarking on trade negotiations because that is part of the UK strategy. That said, where great powers such as the US and UK don't have as much influence anymore, I'd point to countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE. I would note that Prime Minister Modi has really made outreach to the Gulf countries a part of his foreign policy strategy. India just signed the trade agreement with the UAE. Saudi Aramco has massive amounts of investments within India. And so I think the Gulf countries will have an important role to play in mediating the conflict because they have strong strategic interests and commercial interests with Pakistan, but also now India. So I think that actually puts them better placed to help India and Pakistan navigate any conflict, and also provides a neutral venue for example, the national security advisors to meet.
So, Mr. Akhil, one more question, and that is, for example, India was a part of the Quad, but there is another Quad which we are hearing that is known as Quad 2, maybe, where the Israel, India, America, and the UAE are going to be there. So, do you think that how this Quad 2 is going to Quad 2 is going to reshape the world, or particularly because India is getting into this part of the world, into the Middle East as well. So how this the presence of India in Middle East you look while sitting in Washington?
Well, so the West Asia Quad has a lot of potential, and I think my old colleague Mohammed Salman coined this phrase, the Abraham Accords. And I think because he didn't coin the phrase Abraham Accords, but he pointed to the fact that the Abraham Accords could open up the conversation between the US, UAE, Israel, and India. And I think that has shown to be a beneficial partnership, because you have India and the UAE working together on trade. India and Israel have a strong commercial relationship and a strong defense relationship. Don't forget that Prime Minister Modi did visit Israel and Israel has, for example, water sharing technology, which is very important for India. And the US and Israel are strong strategic partners. So, I mean, there's a lot of potential on the defense and commercial relationship. And I think the India UAE FTA does open the pathway for increased commercial collaboration between India, Israel, and the UAE. And then, of course, the US can provide technology and expertise to help really strengthen this Middle East Quad. And I think there are a number of forces pushing those four countries together, similar to how China is pushing India, the US, Japan, and Australia together. So I think there's a great amount of potential, and I think the administration and others are looking for good ideas on how to take that to the very next level.
Well, one last quick question from you, and that is on China. We have been seeing that how the conflict between India and China is growing up. We have seen that how the Chinese are investing on the Indian backyard. So how do you see the future? Do you think that there is a possibility of escalation while there is no one to mediate? The Americans want to bring India in Quad and even to this military wing. While Indians do not have anyone, the trust deficit is decreasing, and the Chinese are not looking India as a neighbor, but they're looking India as a economic partner, but they're looking India as a rival as well. So how do you see that? What is going to happen between India and China? Do you think that there is some sort of a limited scale conflict? There is a possibility of that between India and China?
Well, I think that's India's concern. I mean, they believe that while the West's attention is focused on Russia and also on Taiwan, that this is potentially a chance for China to try to engage in its salami slicing tactics and gain more Indian territory. So they are concerned that this could happen in the spring or summer again. Don't forget, I mean, like we're about to approach the 2-year anniversary of the Galwan Valley clashes. So India is very concerned about that, and I think Foreign Minister Jaishankar has also made it clear that there cannot be a normal relationship until a return to the pre-April 2020 status quo has occurred. But whereas China is trying to portray it as, let's put the boundary issues separate and have a normal relationship, and we can continue to discuss the boundary. But the thing is, from the Indian perspective, China has violated every single one of the written agreements that existed to kind of to ensure that there wasn't going to be a conflict on the line of actual control. Those agreements have been violated, and so from India's perspective, there is no going back to a normal relationship until there is a return to the status quo. India also likely sees the fact that there is a coming Cold War between the US and China, and it has made its bet on the West, which has also aggravated China because China does not like the Quad. Of course, the Ukraine situation has shown some limits of the partnership, and it shows that these four countries will not always agree on everything. But I think India has made its bet on the West and has said, look, this is where we are making our bet because we want to provide an alternative to countries in the region. That said, it is difficult for India because, I mean, you've seen in Sri Lanka, India is playing second fiddle to China at some points there because you've got the Rajapaksas who have clearly gone towards China. India has stepped in to help Sri Lanka in its moment of need. Sri Lanka is potentially about to default on a sovereign bond, which is due in July. And so that's giving India a chance to reclaim some of its lost influence there. But China has great relationships with Pakistan. It has great relationships with Bangladesh. I mean, Bangladesh has probably been the best country being able to play India and China off one another. But as you said, China is making a significant amount of investments in India's neighborhood, and India sees that as a problem. So I think there is an ideological conflict and a geopolitical conflict coming up. And as the West's attention is turned towards Ukraine and even Taiwan, India is in the position where it is the only country with boots on the ground pushing back against Chinese forces right now. And it fears that it's going to remain in that situation.
Well, thank you very much, Akhil, for this deep, insightful analysis. Mr. Akhil Barry, he's working at the Asia Society Policy Institute as a director, strategic initiative. Thank you very much, Mr. Akhil,
Thank you for having me.
Analysis.